Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab podcast. I am your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph. Thank you so much for joining us. And with us today, I have a very special guest, straight from Florida, USA, Dr. Bruce Strouble. He has his PhD in public policy, his bachelor's in history. He is an educator, an activist, an author, sustainability, resilience professional. He does all those things. And he is the author of the book, By Any Dreams Necessary, Anti-Racist Strategies for Sustainability, Resilience, and Environmental Justice in African-American Communities. He teaches at his local community colleges, and I think at FAMU also.
Yes, sir.
Well, sorry, FAMU, Florida A&M University. And he is with us today. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. I'm honored to be here, brother. Thank you for having me.
No, we appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for joining us. And we got so much to talk about. If you do work on environmental justice in African American communities, then I know you're a very busy person.
Oh, yeah.
And
you already know.
And if you've been watching the news, especially in America, you know it's a lot going on over here. And so I'm happy to have him with us, the public policy expert that he is, to help us understand and just figure out what's going on in this whole policy space, particularly as it relates to environmental justice. So let's start here. What are some of the things that you've seen either change or be undone or be undermined since the latest administration came into office as it relates to environmental justice?
Absolutely. Thank you. And again, everyone, Dr. Bruce Strouble. And this is always a good place to start because I always talk about the cyclical nature of racism and oppression and the various forms of oppression that people face in our society. And what happens often, as I explain it, is that as we believe we are making progress, that progress often triggers our opponents to fight back harder. Because they see any progress made by oppressed communities as their community being oppressed or themselves losing. So in turn, what they do is with that backlash, we normally see any rights gain, human rights, any justice initiatives, any initiatives to diversify or democratize our society and make it more equitable for everyone, they roll that back. And we're going through that again. We've seen this happen multiple times in American history, particularly after the American Civil War. You go into the Black Codes, which all those rights that everyone got, even the 40 acres and a mule, that gets taken back, right? And I'm going to connect this to environmental justice in a second. Right after the Reconstruction era, you see Jim Crow. And it's always in this push and pull between democracy and racism, white supremacy in our society. And what happens is here we are now in 2025, and we're seeing a full-fledged backlash against the progress that communities of color and oppressed people and people who want to protect the planet and environment have been making over the past 20 years. And this was incremental progress. It wasn't like we had one sweeping victory, but anything from NEPA being put in place, the National Environmental Policy Act, to the Clean Air Act, clean water protections, Justice 40, a lot of the legislation that President Biden and his administration brought through, we're seeing all that rolled back under the auspice of getting rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But what's hidden in a lot of those executive orders that President Trump was to put forth was a lot of rollbacks of the basic protections of our most vulnerable communities. And it's really going to be, if it's left unchecked, the death of a resilience movement in the United States, where we won't be able to, there won't be a policy support or a federal administrative support of making sure that our communities are resilient while we are the climate crisis is unfurling right in front of our eyes. So we're all experiencing it. We've been making the necessary strides to build up resilience in our communities, particularly focusing on those most vulnerable who've been placed in harm's way. And we see all that being rolled back. And I think that started day one when Trump was in office. You saw a lot of those executive orders he was just signing. And we later learned that he wasn't even really too keen to what was inside of them.
That's
but
right.
This was all part of that Project 2025 destabilize and get rid of government protections for people who need them, because it renders those people more vulnerable. More vulnerable people are more easy to manipulate and isolate politically and oppress. So that's what we're seeing happening right now as we speak. And while every aspect of it may not get the media coverage, we might be focused on the ICE raids, but all there's an intersection between all these activities, and it's all going to come down on our communities if we don't stand up to it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And you made a lot of great points, and I want to really dig into each of them one by one. We're going to come back to the
Okay.
EJ, come back to the intersectionality, the intersectional nature of some of these issues that we're seeing. You made a point. First of all, if you're listening carefully, you can hear the history coming from this man. I mean, he is a professor and it's coming out, and we're going to be blessed by all he has to share. When you talked earlier about after the Civil War, you made a comment about democracy
Mm-hmm.
and racism and rollbacks and rights and protections and things of that nature being withheld, although the civil rights movement and the Civil War itself, as it freed the slaves, was meant to ensure that we all had those rights. Do you see connections or disconnections between things like democracy and the kind of policies that we're seeing? And you mentioned racism, the different ways that that manifests itself in our society. How do you put all that together? How do you see those things interacting and intersecting to create these kind of situations that we see right now?
Absolutely. So again, this push pull, right? Democracy, the way I vision, and I don't believe, and people will disagree with me on this, but I don't believe that the United States, has achieved democracy. I think it's a aspiration that
Mm-hmm.
people have set out towards, and we start moving towards it, and then something will pull us backwards. But when you have a democracy, that means that people's basic human rights are protected, and that you also have free and fair elections with justice and due process, and all those values that we uphold in a democratic situation. But what happens is people have, throughout the history of the United States and throughout much of Western society, they've tried to isolate it and have democracy only for certain groups of people. And then they also will use democracy to pacify the masses, limited democracy to pacify people when that is getting to a boiling point. So you look at a basic human rights such as freedom and autonomy over your body, and we go back to the American Civil War and the incidents leading up into that conflict. And it's basically, the in the south part of the United States, there's so many uprisings, there's so much
Mm-hmm.
commotion going on, that it starts this mass movement that we got to do something about this. And it allows for rights to be doled out, like, okay, we'll give you some rights, but not full inclusion into the democracy or into this governing system. You get limited inclusion, and this leaves people in a situation where those rights could be taken back. So I
Mm-hmm.
think the connection is that there's this kind of dance that's happening in the country itself. The United States has been reluctant to fully move towards a truly democratic society. People have talked about it, people have used it as a political football to score political points, as Malcolm X would say. Like they would use black people as their political football to move their policy along, but they just have always stopped short of fully committing to making sure that everyone is equally involved in our society. And then when we think about the principle of environmental justice, which is
Mm-hmm.
the meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, of their occupation, of their of their national origin or any disability, they have the right to participate in how environmental decisions are made, right? So
Right.
what we're talking about is democratizing the environment. And we could look right at those first executive orders and see they're like illegal DEI. That's what the administration called it. They got rid of all of Biden's executive orders, which were trying to push forward on making sure that people who look like me, women, disabled people, children, are all being equitably protected in our environmental policy. So when you say that's illegal, you want to roll that back. That's a waste. That's wasteful spending. Then you're telling me you do not value the inclusion of all people in decision making, which at its fundamental core is what we mean by democracy.
Oh, that's interesting. So you connect the DEI rollbacks to environmental justice specifically because you're saying that in order to have environmental justice, you have to have full inclusion of everyone. And DEI was doing that. And of course, it was DEI was for
Yeah.
corporations, for universities, for other institutions. But you still think that principle, if it's pulled back, will affect the environmental protection that we're trying to seek. It will affect all the things we're trying to accomplish in this movement. And so to pull it back out there
Hmm.
is essentially to pull it back here as well and to
Absolutely.
prevent us from moving forward.
Absolutely. And even when you look at those executive orders, even the ones that were talking about DEI, they were, they made it about DEI because that became the buzzword, even going back to starting with Governor DeSantis down here in Florida. But
Hmm.
really, when you start to look at some of the policies that got pulled back under that catch-all phrase DEI, because it didn't matter what they called it, but then you see there's environmental justice being wrapped up in there, and if those two were to be separated, we could have discussions about the effectiveness of DEI approaches, but when you just wrap everything up in it, that makes sure that people are included. For example, a DEI practice would be if NOAA's giving out a grant or if the EPA has a grant, that they're going to make sure that the review panel reflects the communities that are going to be benefiting. From the services, because I've sat on those review
Right.
panels where I've been the only Black person there, and they're getting ready to dole out hundreds of millions of dollars, and they're like, "Oh, let's give it to this university," and the university is, all white men who are going to be going into communities telling people about environmental justice. People who have no history in the environmental justice
Hmm.
movement. So that's where the diversity, equity, and inclusion principle, or they call it justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. You'll see that when you start to infuse those principles into your decision making. You say, well,
Hmm.
we want to make sure a certain percentage of this money. That's what Justice 40 was, right? We
Right.
want to make sure a certain percentage of this funding. We want to make sure that the people who are represented in the decision making, that we're inclusive. And you start to embed those practices over time. You start to get more just and equitable decision making. So these are the things that got rolled back immediately. This
Hmm.
was like the front line of what was cut down from the administration. So again, I'm saying that those practices are what it takes to move us towards democracy. And when you wipe those out, you are sending us back towards the opposite extreme, which is the oppression and racism that we've been fighting against.
And so, from your perspective, do you think that that rollback was, I don't want to say the worst part of it, but was that the critical piece that is hindering us from pursuing environmental justice now? Do you see something else that has been done or hasn't been done that's kind of undercutting our efforts even more? Like, how do you see and how do you imagine the ways in which this current administration is operating that's really just
Yeah.
hamstringing the movement?
Man, it's a critical element, but I wouldn't say it's the only piece of this attack that we're facing. A lot of the time, I'm talking with organizers from all over the country. In fact, earlier I was on the call with some organizers from San Diego and from Denver today, and I was talking to Latino organizers. They're having trouble getting people to meetings because they're scared to come out because of the raids, for example, right?
Oh, wow. Yep.
They Other organizations, they've had all their funding taken away, so they've had to do massive layoffs. They're just trying to keep their organization together, and it's just one of those things where you transition from just being solely grassroots and the government saying, "Here, sign this contract with us, and we'll provide you funding to do your work," and you develop a dependency on that. And now you brought on all this staff, you've hired all these community members, and then the government retroactively goes back and says, "Oh yeah, that grant and contract we signed with you, we're not going to honor that." That's
Hmm.
crazy. Like
Yeah.
that's like, so it's a betrayal, and it uproots the whole movement, and then it puts community organizers in a bad position because I've been out here saying like, "Hey, I got this funding. We could do this work. Come work with me. I could give you a job. Leave whatever job you had before and bring your skills here." And now it's been upended, and it's caused a shock for the environmental justice movement. And I think something when it was initially happening, something I appreciated that Dr. Bob Bullard said is that the environmental justice movement has started in the grassroots, and we have to
Hmm.
stay true to our grassroots efforts, or else we end up in these situations. where now people can tell us if you use the word environmental justice, we're going to gut your funding and take away your nonprofit status. So it's just got everyone back on their heels. But I just last week I was at the Southeastern Environmental Justice Summit in Atlanta, Georgia, led by the Harambe House and Dr. Mildred McLean,
Mm-hmm.
and all the people there from all over the Southeast. Everyone is still ready to fight. Everyone is still committed. So just shaken, but not stopped. I think everybody just got shook up and disoriented, but we are reorganizing and getting ready to push back.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's exciting to hear. I want to talk more about how. So you made that point about Latino organizers, people being afraid to come out because of ICE raids. That's obviously what we would consider to be an immigration discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there's discussions about criminal justice and criminal justice reform. But
Mm-hmm.
just talking to you now and thinking about some of the things that we've been discussing, it's clear these things all intersect, that they're all
Exactly.
connected together. Can you help us make those connections more clearly? So we're talking about immigration reform and ICE raids. We're talking about criminal justice and racial justice. We're talking about environmental justice. We're talking about DEI. We're talking about all these different things. How are they connected to this push for environmental justice?
So I think at the centerpiece of this, you have land use decisions, right? And then you have decisions about people's bodies. So when we're talking about people who work on the land directly, people who live in communities that are most vulnerable, are the most exposed, those frontline communities,
Mm-hmm.
these are in many times the same people who are the most likely to be victimized by other oppressive systems. So whether that's our unjust immigration policies, whether that is, as you just mentioned, the mass incarceration efforts. It's people coming from those same communities that are being impacted. Whether it's our indigenous brothers and sisters who have also been removed from land that they had ancestral ties to
Yep.
through this kind of colonial settler colonialism process. So, and then our black and brown communities across the nation, which are continuously being what my mentor Huberta Jackson Lohman calls serial forced displacement, where we've been just continuously moving people over time, disrupting and uprooting communities. Those are the areas, those people who are victimized by these oppressive systems, those are the areas where you're going to have the highest environmental degradation and the most pollution and toxic emissions taking place, because I think ultimately what the research shows is that those are the paths of least resistance.
Mm-hmm.
You could dump your nitrogen oxide there. You could dump um, nitrogen into the water supply there, or lead in the water or in the school water there, right? You could build your plant right next to a school or a park in those communities, because the people don't have the political ties and the voting power to stop you. And the reason why is because they've been systematically disenfranchised for quite some time. So this is how these decisions are being made. We look no further than Jackson, Mississippi, where
Mm-hmm.
once the people start organizing, we see the government will come in. The state government came in and superseded the local government. Now, I think they were able to eventually overturn that, but that's just the kind of struggle that we are constantly rooted in. And it transcends from local, state to the federal level. And now we're seeing it at all levels of government across the country.
Okay, so I mean, if all that's going on,
Mm-hmm.
then I guess from your perspective, what's the response then? Because I imagine we can't do everything all at once. And I imagine that as you speak to people across the country who have varying degrees of environmental injustice happening in their communities, they have very specific issues that they're trying to help, that you're trying to get your advice on to help them overcome. So what are we gonna do?
I
What
thought you never
are we gonna
asked, my
do?
brother.
I need
No,
to
but
know.
so I got you. So this is what I'm trying to address in By Any Dreams Necessary. My book is anti-racist strategies, because I'm saying we have to combat racism as we encounter it wherever we are. So the crux of this is that it's a movement that everyone could participate in, and you don't necessarily have to get out and be a tree hugger like me to do so, or go out and plant trees, or go out to the protest. But in your line of work, it's the decision making do in your community is the type of organizing that you do that is challenging some aspect of the system. Now, eventually we do have to coalesce, we have to build stronger networks between our organizations, but at the basic unit, we should be organizing in our local communities with people who want to see change and addressing the issues as they exist in our community. So if there is and there are political solutions, and then there are also community-based solutions, and you could pick what's appropriate for your specific situation. So in
Mm-hmm.
my book, I talk about various political options that we could consider, some of them more feasible than others, depending on what we're able to enact at either a local, state, or federal level. Like we might not be able to get some things through a Republican Congress right now, but we might be able to see that change 2026 to 2028 if voting is still an option, which I'm hopeful that it is. But then I
Mm-hmm.
also advocate for people to organize politically at the local level. And I think that's become more popular in the last decade, but I want to see local elections getting the same amount of attention that we give our federal elections, because you can want to get rid of the Donald Trump in the White House, but you have a Donald Trump right there on your city council who you
Mm-hmm.
ignoring, and they're making decisions that are equally as harmful. You can have a Donald Trump on your school board that's diverting all your funding from your public schools to private education, and it puts us right back in the same situation. So you asked, what do we do?
Yeah.
Organize at the local level, and between those organizations we need to form networks, and then we need to start cataloging who's working on what, sharing ideas, sharing resources, setting collective goals, having regional summits. And it is no longer could be about people just getting together to talk and grandstand and give fancy speeches. We need to know what work is going to be done, what are the
Mm-hmm.
goals, what are the objectives, what outcomes are we pursuing, and how are we progressing on them. And when we have people who are calling themselves leaders in our community, let's start assessing them. Like, how did you move the metrics?
Yeah.
It's when you got into your position at this organization, or when you were at this church and y'all got involved in this movement, this was the situation. It's been 10, 15 years and things have only gotten worse. Let's give somebody else a chance to, or let's take a different strategy. But I think
Mm-hmm.
it's a matter of starting this to, I think Marcus Garvey would say, and I'm paraphrasing, but we are not we are out organized in many situations. That seems to be one of the significant weaknesses on our side, is that of course it's hard to organize in these conditions, but it's a necessary sacrifice we're gonna have to make. You're gonna have to have allies who you don't perfectly agree with or get along with, but
Yeah.
we're gonna have to find ways to work together to address problems that are immediate to us, and then be willing to support, educate, and share resources with people that help address some of the larger challenges. So
Yeah.
I think that is the root of how we start to dig our way out of this hole they're trying to push us into.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I completely agree too. I mean, there's always strength in numbers, there's strength in organizations and communities building those coalitions and demonstrating the influence that's possible and present when all that happens. I wonder, now that we're talking about it, about what we believe is really the way forward. As we look back on how things have been for the last, I would say, 2 or 3 years, because there
Mhm.
was a lot of excitement, right, around the things that Biden's administration was doing, the Office of Environmental Justice. I remember when his administration combined the Office of Environmental Justice with the Civil Rights Office, had a big
Mhm.
office, $3 billion, hundreds of new staff, and there was a lot of excitement behind some of his executive action toward environmental justice. He had a couple of environmentally justice oriented executive orders. People were really, celebrating them. And like you
Yeah.
said, we kind of built some of the infrastructure on that with an
Yeah.
understanding that that's going to be the way that we move forward. Was that a mistake?
Man, with hindsight, I could say we may have put too much trust in a system that we didn't have enough control over. And I'm guilty of this as well. So I'm not saying anyone did this alone, but yeah, when we look at what happened, we built our infrastructure on an unstable foundation, which is the American political system. Um, and I think it's important to retain an element that is strictly grassroots at all times. That's not to say that we can't build with externally supported infrastructure, but we have to do that while remember we have to learn from this right now, right? When we
Mm-hmm.
go forward, we have to when if this ever becomes a situation again where we got federal support for what we're doing, we cannot give up our autonomy and our ability to operate in the grassroots while trying to move forward. Because look at the consequences, right? You could have the rug pulled out from under you, like we just had
Mm-hmm.
collectively across our movement, and it's unsettling. It breaks trust. It causes people to suffer, and I think we should go into these situations moving forward, expecting that when that help is coming, election could simply change everything. So you have to keep, if you're a chess player, you can't just depend on one piece to get everything done for you. You could use that
Mm-hmm.
piece, but you keep your pawn structure together while you position your queen and your bishops. So all the chess players that get that. If you don't play chess, you're gonna be like, "What is he talking about?"
Yeah. Yeah. No, because I was thinking about this. I was reading this book by Dr. Pello called Critical Environmental Justice Studies. And
Mm,
he makes this point, which I hadn't thought about. And I'm curious to get your perspective on this. He says, one thing that he wants organizations to do is to find ways to operate autonomously because he believes that the system itself, the state system, the federal system, was never designed to support and uplift the marginalized in our communities. It was set up and designed to support, wealthy landowners, uh, well-educated, plantation owners, slave holders. This is how the system was structured and set up, and it always operated with racist, sexist intentions. Is how he frames it. And so,
yeah.
to, in his words, to partner with that system would be setting yourself up. Now, I don't know if I fully agree with that because I think things have changed, but I wonder what your thoughts, as someone who does history, who teaches history, particularly American history, like,
Yeah.
what is your perspective on the idea of you and your organization partnering with the US government, with the state government in Florida, especially, to
Hmm.
try to push initiatives that those structures and those institutions would not support on their own? They wouldn't be interested in that without something getting gained from your support and from your organization. How would
Yeah.
you think that through, and what would your response be to that kind of thinking, that we need to just
Whew.
be separate from
Yeah.
those?
I hear that, and I respect that. And as a critical race theorist, I fundamentally agree that the system itself is orientated to create the results that we're getting. With
Mm-hmm.
that said, the infrastructure that is in place of our governing bodies in the state of Florida, the United States, it could be manipulated and it could be utilized to siphon off benefits for people in need. And we've seen that happen time and time again. It can be used as an instrument to hold back another oppressive force. However, there's always that interest convergence of what that that often is to some other person's benefit. But I think as a means of survival, uh, to get to that point where we could be fully autonomous, we have to use every tool and resource available to us while also remaining conscious that this is a double-edged sword, and while I'm using it, it could still cut me. So I don't think we're in a position where of survival where we could just say we're going to fully go off on our own. And if I'm wrong on this one, then I would be happy about it. But I just don't, from
Yeah.
my assessment, we're not in that position to say we could go fully off, independent on our own, with no attachment to the governing infrastructure in place. Like it just doesn't seem realistic to me. And I could just be
Mm.
jaded from my experiences, but if there are examples, I know normally when people are talking like that, the kind of like that separatist ideology,
Yeah.
it's going to require you to leave the country completely. And I still think you will run into problems. So we need a forward operating base. And if any resources that you could bring down from federal institutions when they're acting in our favor, even if there's with ulterior motives, as long as we can stay clear on our direction and our goals, we should use whatever resources are available to us. And I might be in the minority on that one. I don't know that everyone shares that opinion, but I'm just so committed to progress that I'm willing to take resources as long as I could direct them to help the people. And I recognize the consequences of that, but I'm looking at the
Mm-hmm.
consequences of the people being completely without, and I've seen where that has gotten us as well. And I think when you do a cost benefit analysis of those two situations, I think using whatever resources are available to make sure that we're surviving and getting to the next step and making progress, I think the end is worth the end justifies the means.
Interesting. Let me ask you a policy question. I
Let's
want to
go.
lean on your policy background. I made the argument last year, about this time last year, when the executive orders were coming out of the Biden administration, that while they sounded good and I read them and talked about them on the podcast, they were great. They were completely unsustainable because there weren't any laws in place.
Yeah,
I've noticed that a lot of presidents, they come in, they have their agenda, and they run the executive order route. And
yeah,
it feels like that's the easiest thing to undo if you're no longer in office. And
absolutely.
so I wonder, from your perspective, from a policy perspective, what would be the best approach policy wise to create an environment where we can sustainably fight for these initiatives, for this justice work across the country confidently?
Man, so that's a great question because it kind of goes back to what I was just saying that if I put myself in Biden's shoes and I got a hostile Congress, I have limited political capital, but people are in immediate need, I too would probably start off leading with executive orders while then I try to work through he tried to work through his Build Back Better and other policies to come along with that. But you got to navigate that political labyrinth, and you have a recalcitrant Republican Party at that time, which is hell bent on stopping any idea of progress that you're trying to make.
Mm-hmm.
So it's unlikely that he would have been able to get anything through the House. So you go something's better than nothing. We get these executive orders, understanding that you're going to have to win more elections to keep them in place. So that is a hard pill to swallow. But again, we talking about what's in the best interest of our immediate survival. Because even to have sustainability, you got to have immediate survival. So it's
Mm-hmm.
something that has to be balanced. Now, an optimal situation, we have to be able to have legislative influence. And since the name of the decision escapes me, but there's always been challenges. But since we've decided that corporations, corporate
Yep.
personhood, uh,
Citizens
is
United.
yeah, Citizens United. Thank you. Since that decision is just made that more elusive, that we'll have true electoral influence from the actual body of people over our representatives. We seem to have lost that. So it puts us in a really tough situation. But I think we have to focus on specific areas where we do have the influence and try to
Mm-hmm.
push it through there. But yeah, that's just like one of those. It's like, how do you stop the sun from shining? like man, the mess is so significant. But I think it goes back to the proverb: how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Like, so we just
Mm-hmm.
we keep chipping away at it wherever we can. But it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like, we have to have an intentional, concerted effort, and I think that's one of the things that's lacking. It's just we need kind of a concerted effort that no matter what's going on politically, we're trying to move in this direction. And people had
Mm-hmm.
gotten away from that. And sometimes one of the consequences of all these executive orders and people thinking everything is sweet is that
Right.
it takes your eyes off the prize. People are like, "Oh, I can kick back now." And it's like, no, now we need to push forward even harder while we have this momentum, so that when the pendulum swings the other way, we'll be further enough along so that the setbacks won't put us all the way back to the 1930s like we are now.
No, I completely agree. Okay, last policy question. This is my last policy question. Because I always wonder this. So, like you said, the pendulum does swing, right? So we had,
Mhm.
if you want to think Democrat, Republican, kind of throughout the most recent history. I mean, we had 2 terms of George W. Bush, two
Mhm.
terms of Obama, one Trump, one Biden, one Trump again. it's going to swing back. And it's going to be a situation where there's going to be a Democratic president who controls the House and the Senate, and they'll have what they're going to call themselves. They're going to say they have a mandate. They always say that I have a mandate. Now that I've been elected, does that, whoever that person is, does this become their signature issue? Do we push them to spend that capital here versus spending it on some type of specific budget bill or some type of Medicaid for all program? Or do we talk about the fact that we need environmental justice? Here's an environmental justice related legislative initiative. Go there, and we push them in that direction.
Yeah, man, you asking some tough ones, bro.
I need to know. What are we going to tell them when they get back in?
Oh, man. Okay, so the progressives get in power. See, I don't know if just the more conservative wing of the Democratic Party would support that. They'll be like, nope, let's just get something middle of the road that brings everybody together that everyone could compromise on. So I don't think they would. But if you could get the progressive element in power, or even someone leaning progressive in power, then I think we have to push it, because we're talking about, there's so much tied into it, because we're talking about the infrastructure of the country. We're talking about the climate crisis and the country's ability to survive it. We're talking about the future and health of the planet. So all budget discussions, everything pales in comparison to this. But for some reason, no one is willing to. I guess there's the fear of being perceived as a zealot about it, but the science backs what we're saying. It's not like we're just out here making this up. Like, it's happening. People are experiencing it. People felt those wildfires in Altadena and in California. People felt that freak flood storm that went through Asheville, North Carolina. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's happening. Yeah. This is what people were predicting for years. So it's here. So I think we have to be adamant that political capital is focused on making sure that we are doing what's necessary for humanity to survive this situation. And it sucks, because like, the current administration has done so much damage to the United States international reputation and our ability to negotiate, because no one's going to believe we're negotiating in good faith. Or they'll say, well, we know how your country operates. 4 years you want to lead and you want to act like this, and then the next 4 years you walk everything back. So how would anyone trust us? The United States may not be the world leader in terms of climate progress. We may end up having to follow other countries, because that political capital is so short-lived. But with that said, yes, the answer is yes. We have to push it. We have to make sure it doesn't have to be called that. I'm okay with however they name it. If they want to name it the Future Infrastructure of the United States, Save the United States Act, whatever they want to call it. So maybe it's in the marketing. We tell them, like, this is to improve the economy, to protect the economy, and to protect the United States from a cataclysm. And maybe people will get behind it like that if we market it correctly. Because if we come out and say we need to plant trees and we need to get green spaces, we need to make sure that there's not toxic emissions poisoning Black and Indigenous communities, for some reason that doesn't resonate with enough Americans.
Yeah. Nope, you're right. And of course, the last time around with Biden, there was, Senators Manchin and Sinema from Arizona who put a lot of his initiatives on hold and made it difficult for him to pass things. So you're right. There is a situation where you could have some conservative-leaning Democratic voices preventing that kind of progress from happening. So I completely understand that. And you're right. It's a hard situation to manage. All those different perspectives, all those views, all those desires all at once. It's hard, but you know what? We elected you to do the hard things. So if you're listening, It's supposed to be hard. I want to end though on a really positive note. I know that you do a lot of community work. You do a lot of consulting work with people who are trying to get their communities on track. What are some of the things that you've been seeing that have been issues that you've been either working with people on, that you've seen personally? And how have you, through your work, your organizations, your connections, how have you and your sphere of influence, how have y'all been pushing to improve those situations that you're concerned about?
So yeah, one of the things I'm most proud of right now is just our work with youth. I think what sometimes goes unrecognized is that when adults are having these conversations or the news is on and the kids are hearing it's like, oh, there's a war, there's bombs going off, the planet is in decline. And it's like this is their future, and they're hearing
Mm-hmm.
that their future is looking dismal. And this has an effect on our kids. And I don't think people are paying attention to that. They're on these tablets now and they're doom scrolling a lot of times, seeing like, 10 years, this is going to happen. Tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
this is happening. So that causes depression. And we know that suicide rates are rising. We know that people are depressed. Since COVID, education has been struggling. It's starting to rebound. So I think a lot of the research is showing that as we start to do social emotional learning and we connect that with learning about the environment and your place in the environment, we're seeing some fantastic gains in inspiring young people to be environmental stewards, but also to be politically literate, improving their literacy rates as well, and their desire to learn science and their desire to learn math as it relates to the environment. Because I think a big thing that people will always say is like, man, when am I ever going to use this in the future? It's like, no,
Right.
like this,
Yep.
you're going to use it right here because we need some way to get out here and figure out how do we stop this aquifer from drying up in the next 20 years. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
how do we
Yeah.
prevent water wars between Florida and Georgia? That's up to y'all.
Mm-hmm.
So the kids actually are enjoying it. So I have through my organization Citizens for a Sustainable Future, we have what's known as the Brilliant Resilience Youth Empowerment Program.
Mm-hmm.
We partner with in our region of Florida with several organizations, and we're bringing kids in, and they're getting a robust environmental justice education, leadership advocacy training, and then they kind of move through our program. Uh, we got paid jobs for youth in the program as well. So a lot of them, it's their first job experience, and they're like the pride that comes to the families and to the kids when
Yeah.
they had their first job, and it's like I'm an environmental steward for this organization. They're going to carry that into college if they go or into their first employment situations, and it really makes me happy. It's a way to give back. Aside from that, all over the country, whether it's through my groundwork team or at Groundwork USA, we have through all our affiliates, they have green teams where they got youth out there building bioswales, putting rain gardens in. My team in Jacksonville, they were doing cool roofs on people's homes, lowering temperatures in their communities. So my colleague, Kate Mingoya, wrote a good book. I'm supposed to be here promoting my book, but I want to plug her book as well because it's called
Yeah.
uh, Climate Action for Busy People. And she just talks about just the different steps that you could take at a micro level that could, in a conglomerate, they start to make a significant change. So there's all these different actions that people could take. And just to be a part of that, that kind of fulfills me and recharges my battery to stay in the fight.
Oh, that's interesting. So focusing on the youth specifically, I think that's a great way to set us up for the future, because the future, it can be grim, but if you have people who are trained now, prepared to move forward and to fight for a better future, then it could be really bright. Um, what else are you doing? I know you're doing more than that. Tell me what else
Oh
you got
man.
going on. I know you got stuff going on, so tell us about it. We run out of time. I want to know all the things you got going on
All right.
before we
So,
go.
aside from the organizations I work with, we organizing politically, particularly in African American communities, with the focus of kind of building these nonpartisan uh, political literacy academies. Whereas we call ours here in Tallahassee, Florida, it's called Tallahassee Alert, and it's just we
Mm-hmm.
bring candidates in, we bring people, we bring community members in, and it's like talk to these candidates. This is the city commission candidates. These are your appointed officials who make decisions on this, or they decide where this money goes. Get involved. Stay like know how that money's spent. They had a budget of $100 million last year. What did they do with it? Why aren't we paying attention? And I think because ultimately people just don't make that connection. So without there being a venue for people to get access to it, they'll just kind of stay focused on what they're doing. But if you build it, the people will come out. They're like, hey, I actually do want to know how they spent my tax money and how they spent
Yeah.
my property taxes. So yeah, just getting people back engaged with local politics is one of my passions, and we do work around that. Aside from that, I just am anywhere where people need help with getting their or keeping their organizations afloat and coming up with ideas. I try to chime in. I'm on the board for an organization called Rethink Energy Florida here in Florida, and we focus on just how do we get more equitable distribution of clean energy across the state. And so you'd be surprised we get support on both sides of the aisle for that, because it's not always articulated as a struggle against them. It's more so like, how do we get more benefits for everyone? So there's some things we could still win. It's just we've been pushed into this ugly situation, and I
Hmm.
think it's just going to be a matter of us continuing to fight as we move forward.
Okay, and with all that work, how is it supported? We just talked about how funding is scarce, how it's hard to kind of get resources now with these new initiatives. How are you able to fund and sustain some of this work during this time?
So, man, the funding comes from diverse sources. We crowdsource funding. We've gotten grants from different organizations, from the Moving Forward Network Environmental Justice Fund,
Hmm.
that are what we call now the Solidarity Support and Solutions Fund. We got funding from the Gulf Research Program from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Math, and then from local agencies as well, whether that was our Children's Services Council. So it's just whenever we find funding that aligns, we will go after it. Have good grant writers that I work with. We also use collaborations between multiple organizations. That's something that's been very useful, so that we don't all end up competing for the same funding. We'll all apply for funding together and divvy it up. And so
Hmm.
then, and outside of that, it's just I got fundraisers running all the time on Facebook, anywhere, like sponsor a kid through this program, pay for restoration in this community. So it's all like that. And we don't have a boatload of money. We often are working on skeleton budgets, so it's also a
Yeah,
lot
yeah.
of in-kind services, volunteer work. But it's just, I think when people believe in the mission, they're willing to make sacrifices if they think that it's going to benefit the people. Now, I would like to get to a point where I could fully fund everything that we do and fully pay everybody involved, but we have not got there yet. And I know I have seen people who've made it a little bit further on this path, though, so I know it's possible.
Nice, nice. Well, we're about to run out of time, but with every guest, I always ask if you got any parting words, any words of encouragement, anything you want to leave with the listeners, because they've learned a lot, they've heard a lot. And so when they turn this off, we want them to walk away with when they're done listening.
Solidarity is not charity, right? Our
Mm,
ability to stand together will benefit us and the people we stand with, or else that's not true solidarity. So I want everybody to just to think about that as you go off into whatever's coming tomorrow. We don't know, but the one way we will get through it is together. And outside of that, please check out my new book, By Any Dreams Necessary, Anti-Racist Strategies for Sustainability, Resilience, and Environmental Justice, available on all major platforms and at brucestrubleJr.com.
perfect, perfect. Hey, Dr. Bruce, thank you so much for joining us today on this episode. We appreciate your insight, your knowledge, your historical perspective, and that activism. We love that activism. So thank you so much for being here.
Appreciate you, brother. Keep doing your show, man. I love it.
All right, we appreciate you too coming on. And that is the Environmental Justice Lab, where we are for the people and for the planet. We will see you next time.